Thanks for joining us inside the Dancer's Studio, where we bring listeners like you closer to the creative process. Inside the Dancer's Studio is a program of the National Center for Choreography at the University of Akron. This episode was recorded in the presence of a live audience in June of 2022 during the inaugural Creative Administration Research Summit convening in Akron, Ohio. Today we are excited to share an excerpt of the opening plenary titled Artist as Model for the New Socioeconomic Normal. In this portion of the session, Christy Bolingbroke, our Executive Artistic Director, is in conversation with Washington, D.C.-based performer, poet, director, and arts administrator Marc Bamuthi Joseph. Bamuthi is a 2017 TED Global Fellow, an inaugural recipient of the Guggenheim Social Practice Initiative, and an honoree in the United States Rockefeller Fellowship. While engaging in a deeply fulfilling and successful artistic career, Bamuthi also proudly serves as Vice President and Artistic Director of Social Impact at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. He is in high demand for his creative approach to organizational design, brand development, and community mediation, and has been enlisted as a strategic partner or consultant for companies ranging from Coca Cola to Carnegie Hall. Bamuthi is the founding program director for the exemplary nonprofit Youth Speaks and is a co-founder of Life is Living, a national series of one-day festivals which activate under-resourced parks and affirm peaceful urban life.
This work is hard, right? But we do hard things as artists all the time. And we often make it look easy. So I think another big part of CAR has been like, how do you visibilize this work? And especially when you have like a big institution like the Kennedy Center or some of our other cultural organizations that just seem to happen. So I appreciate hearing where you were, the statement that you were making in July 2020, and then some of the work that you've been able to do inside of that big institution since then. I'm curious from your perspective, were there any surprises, things that were easier or things that were harder and you're still working on? I'll give you a optimistic, pessimistic, sort of choose your own adventure there.
Cool. It's all hard. It's just, I think it's a matter of fatigue or not. Like when we feel more able in our bodies and in our spirits, that to me is what fluctuates the most, I would say. I'm really fortunate that my administrative practice is in coincidence and a part of my creative practice. So I'm able to show an opera initiative within the context of the Kennedy Center and also share an opera that I'm writing. And those kind of co-aligned practices give me strength.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds also kind of like an individual symbiosis. I think sometimes when we offer this idea of the binary, you're an artist or you're an administrator, and there's a lot of fatigue in our smaller arts, project-based artists, single artists who are like, you feel the stretch in your bodies of trying to do both. But it sounds like you found some sort of
because there are certain questions that I can ask while making a dance or while making a song or while making a play that the institution doesn't have the wherewithal to ask. And they're levers of power, of finance, and of access that are present within the institution that I, as an individual, or the band of artists that I roll with, aren't able to pull off. So it's definitely a unique situation. But what I advocate for is that kind of relationship to be more entrenched in our field-wide practices. That, when I talk about the deployment of artist intellect, maybe it's within an administrative capacity, but What I would like to see is more presenting institutions deploying artists' intellect to produce these new currencies that also exist within the framework of like the cost of doing business or the programmatic output.
150%. And follow-up question, one thing that I was holding was, what advice would you have for any artists who are not inside of an institution? And certainly from my experience, hearing just so many of them who are like, artists are futurists.
Sure.
They have the ideas, but they still feel like they can't cross the threshold and get decision makers on board, whether they're funders or presenting institutions or their local civic institutions. And you did not start at the Kennedy Center. You have a whole other repertoire of experience. So I'm curious what kind of advice you would offer smaller project-based single artists who feel that they are holding up the whole world.
Yeah. Man, none of this is an obligation. We can walk away at any moment. The problem is all of this is, for most of us, a spiritual and energetic calling, and thus it is an obligation. So, if, so many of us are so bright in so many different areas and we could do pretty much whatever the fuck we wanted. But we choose and we have been chosen. So a kind of grounding in that, and a grounding in the responsibility that comes as a response to ancestry, I think is really critically important. So the first piece of, advice, wisdom, truth, or just kind of personal perspective is to identify where you are grounded in your journey. Because most of the things that we seek are not possible in our lifetimes. And that's the thing of our, that's just kind of like the deal, fam. So what I like to advocate for is the adjacent possible. And what I mean by that, I take this from this cat, Steven Johnson. He wrote this book called Where Good Ideas Come From. And in the book, he talks about a kind of relationship between technological evolution and the evolution of the natural world. There are certain things that have happened as the natural world has evolved that have are then mimicked in a kind of practice of innovation. So for instance, all the materials that were necessary, all the kind of like atomical, molecular, submolecular material needed to make this building, all present at the Big Bang. But you couldn't go from the Big Bang to this to this building. There had to be all these other things in between. There was an adjacent possible. So what's the adjacent possible in our cultural vision? And if there is a generational and transformational vision, the thing that we're working on is the adjacent possible that scaffolds us to that social vision. I started, Christy referenced this, and we go back a few years, 15 years or more. We were both in the Bay Area at a time. I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. I left Atlanta and moved to the Bay Area. I taught 10th grade English and West African dance. I had no business teaching West African dance. But I ain't know, and they ain't know either. So, English was cool though. I'd read a book. There was this young man, this 16-year-old kid, Biko Eisen Martin, who is now, he's performing at Manhattan Theater right now, at MTC right now. He's 16, he's like a sophomore in high school, and he heard me read this poem, and he spit a poem back to me. And man, we thought we were the only poets. You know what I mean? Like we were alone in this school. This is the late 90s, and that relationship flourished and became, over time, through a number of adjacencies, became an organization called Youth Speaks, which produced Brave New Voices, which is the national youth poetry festival. Brave New Voices launched the National Youth Poet Laureate program, which has been newly famous by Miss Amanda Gorman. But when I think about 25 years ago, doing a poem in a schoolyard and a 16-year-old kid responding, and I make the leap from that poem to Amanda Gorman's poem on the occasion of Joe Biden's inauguration. And I think about everything that was made possible by one act. That also would be my advice, is to push and to watch gravity. Watch gravity work. Watch the physics of your vision go to work.
I love that reminder as well. If artists are also futurists, I like to say arts administrators are time travelers.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're working on that grant report, even though you did the work 18 months ago, but that's when the deadline is. And trying to repurpose some of those institutional deadlines. But one of our CAR practices, for many that have been in investigative retreats, is what one of our first NCC Akron graduate assistants, DeMarcus Hakeem Suggs, informed me. He said, "Oh, you're doing Sankofa." I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And now I'm happy to name it. And this idea of acknowledging the gravity, acknowledging the step-by-step accomplishments, that the bing bang didn't happen and then you were just an entity over time, and encouraging us to revisit that exercise as a part of, it's not just what's your next project.
Yeah.
And
I answered your question in a kind of like macro energetic way. But it's also very tactical. And I think I just want to point that out as well, is it's very hard to convince people of a vision that they themselves cannot see. That's the hard part about being a creative visionary.
Well, and even if it's what you're trying to do moving forward, but what I think we've learned from that practice just in our investigative retreats is, that you're carrying all that experience, but all they see is whatever the latest thing is that you're doing.
Right.
So how are you, perpetuating the story? You don't have to tell them everything from day one. And then on the second day, we did this. But finding that space to be reflective, to be able to shape it.
Yeah.
The other benefit over time that I don't think is a new challenge in the field, but I feel that you've also hinted at or acknowledged in your answer, is the interpersonal. And what was in your presentation was the idea of the individual, the pyramid of readiness. But the individual is one of 400 individuals that make up an organization or an institution. And then, like a COVID virus, what is the contact reach? What is the potential spread? Can we reclaim that to think about all the students and the people that you have touched over time that you don't know when they might come back and do it again? So I'm hearing a lot of that tenseness, I'm going to try that word on, between the individual and the organization, and then all the individuals in our field. I am curious if you could talk more about embodying the practice of this work. We know how to take care of the facility as performers and what that practice means, whether it's stretching the muscle groups and building cardiovascular endurance. You mentioned fatigue.
Yeah.
That's emotional endurance and mental endurance.
Yeah.
So I'm curious whether it's for you on an individual level or as a leader of a team, your department or peer-to-peer across the organization. Do you have any practices for embodying this work and building up that kind of endurance?
Survival, how to survive. I have to say that these two things really feed each other for me. I am in love, and partnership sustains me. My kid is super cool, and fatherhood sustains me. I am awakening to my new body, to my almost 47-year-old body. And, the healthy relationship of spirit to emotion to body, I think is really important in terms of, long-term sustainability. But there isn't like, I wake up at 7:30 and this happens. I'm not, ritualistic in that way. I also make sure to play a lot of Words with Friends. And, to watch the Warriors. Okay, so sidebar. They put
James' hometown.
They put me in a room that had a Bay Area area code, and I was like, "Oh yeah, we got this, no doubt." I'm in the look. Lies. But that's also, I think, a really important part of just like general health, man, is like you just gotta, dubs and six, you just gotta like really, thank you. I know somebody understands. You really have to lean into all the things that are not the world on Atlas's shoulders. I think this is all very serious work. It's a serious pursuit, but, the way that I define social impact at the Kennedy Center is that it's a systems-based practice that centers joy towards art by using arts for non-arts outcomes. And that centering of joy is incredibly important. Having language for me is also just a really important practice. What I would say is the kind of generation of new language, so long as it's not super opaque, is really important in this work. And I try to use phrases like currencies of redemption or currencies of reconciliation, because what I don't want is for the folks that we work with to become complacent, because it's like, oh, I know that language, I know that vocabulary, and we just kind of write it off. This is what it is. So part of staying healthy is also making sure that your partners are not complacent. And all that is tenuous, it is arduous, but again, it's what we're called to do.
I have one more question for you, which is all of your note that we'll be turning to broaden the conversation and hear from you as well. So Christy will get the mic. And this is something that we ask in our Inside the Dancers Studio interview and podcast series. Whether as an artist, as a leader, we are somewhat conditioned to be reactive to the deadlines.
Yeah.
Nothing like a deadline.
Right.
And what do you do when you're in a rut, when the flow is not happening? Any practices there?
Breathe through the depression of that. I don't know what else to say. I am so thankful for deadlines, because my way of creating is to think about the thing until the deadline. And then like, I'm the person that gets the thing in at 11:59 p.m. Like that's me. So, but we have to be tender with ourselves. I think we have to be gentle with ourselves along the way. For some folks, that is part of the process, but there are probably other ways of going about creation than to be so self-critical as to paralyze creative thought.
I appreciate the reminder to be tender. I've been in some conversations, with a lot of leaders who dealing with the last 2 years, the crisis management, not feeling that they were up to the task emotionally, physically, mentally, and identified that one of our other practices, in addition to working to deadlines, was to push to collapse.
Yeah.
I'm going to work as hard as I can and then go on vacation and totally unplug.
Yeah.
Which wasn't necessarily regenerative.
Yeah.
And so the idea that to be tender with yourself is an action, is a practice. It's not giving up. It's not, just sort of releasing yourself.
Yeah. Part of that for me is reading for pleasure. And committing to finish a book a month. Like I read the internet all the time, so I'm reading, but I don't think I finished a book in 2021. Like I read a lot in 2020. I don't think I finished a book in 2021. I think I just read the internet a lot. I started a lot. So, kind of being in relationship with alternate fictions is another practice I think that, might catalyze something inspired, but it's also just being in relationship and sustained relationship with literature. I find to be a kind of staging ground for my own creative practice. Because the thing is, you, as a reader, the way that I love to read is with a pencil, and I'm having a conversation with the author in the margins. Maybe that's the same conversation that happens in the notes on your phone or, in some other space. But there's a kind of reciprocity that's possible, I think, with inside of reading for pleasure, that often yields a different kind of creative result for me. So maybe that I would just put that out there.
Next time you come to Akron, we will go to Elizabeth's bookshop. So,
Great.
All right.
I love I got a library card.
You got a library card.
I did.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That sounds like residency right there.
Yeah,
You got a library card here.
Yeah.
All right. Christy has the microphone. What questions, comments do you have? Right up front here.
Thank you so much. I just have a brief question about okay, I think it's brief. Okay, let's see. I'm thinking about dignity. What you started out with, and thinking about that relationship between healing and sickness that you also, you started out with in the beginning, and it feels like there's the healing as a journey in relationship to that illness, and maybe the way that I'm looking at it is the potential, and I don't know if you're making this relationship, but of dignity on the other side of that, once there's that kind of boundness not to have to deal with anymore, then there's dignity. But I'm just wondering how what's inside of that term for you, because I resonate with that notion of inventing new languages, inventing new ways to deal with words, ways to be with them. And you brought in you brought in the Big Bang and gravity and resources, like the being in relationship to resources and how that relates us to one another. And I'm just wondering if there's in that conception, the way that you're dealing with dignity, if there's planet in there, if there's universe in there, what that has to do with it, if it does.
Thank you for the question. It has a little less to do, I think, with a kind of cosmology as it does with the United States. The Kennedy Center is a performing arts center. It also is a living memorial to the 35th president of the United States. So it has a federal adjacency. And, within the bureaucracy of the federal government, there isn't a whole lot of room for futurity or whatever the hell I've been talking about. Like, there's just not a whole lot of room for all that.
There isn't a line item for futurity?
There isn't a line item. No, but there are constitutional principles. And we're kind of in this space where constitutional principles aren't enough, but it's a framework. I was born and raised in Queens. I went to school in Atlanta. I lived in Oakland for 25 years. I'm a first generation American. My parents are from Haiti. I'm not like America rah-rah. But being in DC, there are lots of reminders of the promise. And there's this kid in Detroit named Jamaria Hall. A few years ago, he sued the state of Michigan. He and a bunch of other kids from Detroit's worst performing arts school, worst public high schools, sued the state of Michigan because they claimed that their 14th Amendment rights were being violated, that they had a right to literacy under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. That shit broke me open because, we're just a few generations from literacy even being legal for people that look like you and me. So the idea that to have access to the American franchise means that you have to have access to letters, really deep. So then what else do we have a right to? Do we have a right to clean water? Do we have a right to clean air? Within the context of this country, what are our basic rights? And to me, dignity is not a lot to ask for. It is so basic. And so when you say to an institution, I want 45% of the board to look like this, or I want 39% of programming to look like this, or I want 98%. That's a little harder, I think, than maybe saying, let's work on dignity for all people. It's very hard to be on the other side of that moral line or to justify it. And to your question, yeah, dignity is a line item, even if futurity isn't. Futurity is the way that you get there. So that's a lot of it is that. A lot of it is just basic and emotional and trying to tie, if the magic of art is kind of something that lives on a y-axis and the structure to run an organization or an operation runs on the x-axis, what are the things that connect the two? And I think systems connect the two. So I try to use these magic words like forgiveness or public healing or inspiration or dignity. And I connect those magic words that come from my arts practice to this structural design. And that to me is design infrastructure.
Thank you, Juma. That's reminding me of an experience working with a marketing firm that their feedback to the organization that will remain nameless right now, but I'll talk to anyone afterwards, was you keep talking about your assets. We're a school, we're a company, we're a theater. And that actually, their point, this for-profit marketing firm, was they were looking for the inspiration.
Yeah.
They were looking for the dignity. They were looking for forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great reminder for all of us, because so oftentimes, especially if you are jumping from project to project, how many times do we start saying, I'm making this work, it's about this.
Yeah.
Instead of I'm working in magic.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, that invites me to tell me more. and asking for the inquiry. So I appreciate just trying this on. All right. The inspiration, no doubt, happened, but now you just broke us down, and how are we going to put ourselves back together after today?
Inside the Dancers Studio Lunchtime Talk Series is supported by NCC Akron, the University of Akron, the University of Akron Foundation, and the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture Series in the Arts. Our podcast program is produced by Jennifer Edwards. Ellis Rovin is our composer and editor. Theme music by Flaco Torres. Cover art by Micah Krause. Special thanks to Kat Wentz and the team on the ground in Akron, Ohio. To learn more about NCC Akron, please visit us online at nccakron.org and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCC Akron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching for Inside the Dancers Studio. Please share with your friends, and if you'd like to help get the word out, rate us and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.